July 1944. The Texas sun was already burning when a bus full of captured German women rolled through the red dust of Camp Hereford. They had been told they were going to prison. They expected guns, fences, and hunger. But as the dust cleared, they saw something strange. Real cowboys. Men on horses, wearing wide hats, singing under the open sky. The women blinked. Were they dreaming? Had they stepped into an American movie? The smell of leather and hay replaced fear. The sound of hooves echoed through the fields. This was not war anymore. It was freedom. Wild, loud, and real. And for these women, it would change everything they thought they knew about America, about enemies, and even about themselves. Stay till the end to see how these women's hearts changed forever. If you love true stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and help us keep sharing powerful history from World War II. The bus groaned as it stopped at the gate of Camp Hereford, Texas. It was July 1944, and the air was so hot it seemed to hum. Inside the bus, 32 German women wiped sweat from their faces. Most had been nurses, clerks, or volunteers with the Red Cross. Now they were prisoners of war. They had crossed the ocean expecting wire fences, armed guards, and cold metal beds. Instead, the first thing they saw made them blink in disbelief. Out in the open field, men on horseback moved through clouds of dust. Their wide hats shaded tanned faces. Their boots clicked with silver spurs, and their ropes swung in slow circles as they guided cattle across the plain. The smell of animals and sun-baked grass drifted through the air. One of the prisoners, Greta Schneider, whispered to the woman beside her, "Are those real cowboys?" The guard, half smiling, said quietly, "Ma'am, that's Texas for you." It was a strange sight for women raised on discipline and steel. Back home, Germany's fields had been full of soldiers and orders, not singing men on horses. Here, there was rhythm but no shouting, work but no fear. The women pressed their faces against the glass, trying to understand this new kind of order. One built not on control, but on balance. The bus engine clicked as it cooled, and a cowboy tipped his hat toward them as if welcoming guests, not enemies. When they stepped down from the bus, the ground felt soft with dust, not the hard gravel of a prison yard. The guards were calm, almost casual. There were fences, yes, but inside those fences the air smelled of hay and fresh bread from the kitchen. Camp Hereford held over 5,000 prisoners that summer. Most were men from captured German divisions, but a few women had been sent to help with hospital and clerical work. America had space, food, and too few hands to harvest it all. Every pair of hands mattered, even those once eyes against it. That first night, Greta lay on a bunk and listened. No bombers, no air raid sirens, no barking commands, only crickets and the distant low of cattle. For the first time in years, she could see stars through the barracks window. "It's too quiet," one of the nurses whispered. "I don't trust it." But another answered softly, "Maybe peace sounds like this." The next morning, the camp commander explained their new duties. "Texas needs workers," he said. "Cotton to pick, cattle to tend. You'll be paid small wages, treated fairly, and expected to work hard." He paused, looking around the room. "You are prisoners, but you are also human beings. Remember that." For many of the women, it was the first time an officer had spoken that word, human, with respect. The paradox was sharp, captured by the enemy, yet freer than they had been in years. Outside the mess hall, they saw the same cowboys riding by. Their laughter carried on the wind. Greta thought, they looked like something from a movie. But movies were lies. This was real, and that made it even harder to believe. Over 425,000 German prisoners were held in America during the war, scattered across more than 500 camps. About 4,000 worked on Texas ranches and farms. They picked cotton, repaired fences, and learned that the enemy was not always what they had been told. Camp Hereford was one of the largest, stretching over 700 acres of dry grassland. To the women who had known bombed cities, it looked endless. As evening came, the sun fell red over the plains. Greta watched a cowboy ride along the fence line, silhouette sharp against the light. He wasn't a guard, but somehow he kept order just by being there. Quiet, calm, certain. She realized that control didn't always need shouting. Sometimes it came from trust, between rider and horse, between people and the land. It was a kind of discipline she had never been taught. The camp dogs barked once, then went quiet. The heat softened, and the smell of supper, beans, cornbread and smoked meat, drifted through the barracks. The women lined up in silence, still unsure what to expect. One of them whispered, "Maybe tomorrow they will wake us with whips." Greta shook her head. "No," she said, staring out at the fading orange sky. "These people don't need whips. They have freedom." But this was only the beginning. What they would see next, out on the open range, would challenge everything they had learned about work, control, and what it meant to be civilized. The next morning, the women woke up to the sound of a bell and the smell of coffee. The Texas sun was already bright through the small windows. Greta sat on her bunk, still half in disbelief that this place, calm, dusty and full of laughter, was a prison. Guards walked by, but they didn't shout. They carried clipboards, not rifles. It felt more like a work camp than a jail. After breakfast, a tall American officer stepped forward. "Ladies," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you are prisoners of war, but under the Geneva Convention, you have rights. You'll work, you'll be paid, and you'll be treated with respect. You'll be helping local farmers and ranchers. Texas needs help." The room stayed silent. Then he added, "We're short on men. Our young farmers are overseas, fighting in Europe. The crops still need planting, and the cattle still need care. You will help us keep this country alive while the war goes on." The women looked at each other, confused. Back home, they had been told Americans were cruel, that they treated prisoners like animals. Yet here they were, being asked to work, not beaten, not starved. The paradox was almost too much to understand. They had come as enemies, but the Americans were handing them gloves and tools, not weapons. Outside, a truck engine rotated, umbled. Wooden signs showed the names of local ranches, Henderson, Miller, Carson, all waiting for labor crews. Around 10,000 prisoners across Texas were already working on farms by mid-1944. They picked cotton, built fences, harvested wheat, and even helped in canning factories. The United States Army called it the Prisoner Work Program. For many Americans, it was a strange sight. German soldiers wearing denim instead of uniforms, working side by side with civilians. That afternoon, Greta and her group were assigned to a ranch called WWII, 50 miles away. The camp commander explained, "You'll stay there for months. You'll earn 80 cents a day, paid to the US Army, not to you. You can buy small things from the camp store, soap, paper, stamps. Fair enough?" The women nodded slowly. Some were grateful. Others stayed cold and silent. They didn't trust kindness from their captors. As the truck bounced along the dirt road, the women stared out the windows. The land stretched forever. Yellow grass, windmills turning, cattle moving like slow shadows. They passed small wooden houses, old barns, and fields of corn. Every few miles they saw families working the soil, mothers, children, even old men. It hit them then. America was fighting a world war, yet its land was still alive and growing. Greta thought about home. Her town in Saxony had been bombed twice. Fields were burned, families scattered. Here, everything seemed untouched. She whispered, "So much land, and so few soldiers." Another prisoner replied, "Maybe this is why they can fight so far away. Their farms still stand." When the truck reached WWII Ranch, the first thing they saw was a tall man leaning against a fence post. His name was Jim Henderson, the ranch owner. He looked them over with quiet eyes and said, "Welcome to WWII. You'll be treated fair if you work fair." His wife, Maria, brought out a tray of water and cornbread. The women hesitated. Prisoners didn't expect to be offered food, but Maria smiled. "You'll need strength for what's ahead." That night they slept in a small wooden bunkhouse that smelled of hay and soap. The sound of horses breathing outside was strangely peaceful. Greta couldn't sleep. She thought about the officer's words. "You have rights." It sounded simple, but in a war that had taken millions of lives, it felt powerful. The statistics from the camp reports said it clearly. Prisoners in Texas produced over 90,000 tons of food and helped save more than 2,000 farms from collapse during the war. Their labor wasn't just tolerated, it was vital. And it worked because of a simple rule the Americans believed in. Work could bring order, and respect could build peace faster than punishment. Before dawn, Maria knocked on the bunkhouse door. "Time to get up. You're Texans now," she said, half joking. The women laughed quietly. The sky outside was still grey, the air cool and sweet. Greta stepped out and saw the horses lined up in the corral, their breath like smoke in the morning air. Somewhere in her chest, something shifted, fear turning slowly into curiosity. This was not the war she had known. This was something else. And what they would learn next, when they touched saddle leather and felt the earth move beneath a living animal, would change their idea of control forever. The morning sun turned the sky gold as the truck rolled away from Camp Hereford. Dust rose behind the wheels like smoke. The German women sat in the back, holding their small bags, unsure what to expect. They had been prisoners, nurses, and secretaries, not farmers. Now, they were being sent to a ranch in the middle of Texas to live and work among cowboys. Greta sat by the wooden railing, her hair tied back with a piece of cloth. Every mile felt like a journey to another planet. The land was wide and quiet, broken only by windmills and herds of cattle moving slowly across the plains. The smell of dust, hay, and the sunlight mixed together. "It looks empty," one of the women said. "No soldiers, no war." Greta nodded. "Maybe that's what peace looks like." After a few hours, the truck stopped beside a wooden gate with two big letters burned into it. WWII Ranch. Beyond it, the land stretched as far as they could see. Fences, barns, and horses running free. A tall man walked toward them. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his boots dusty. This was Jim Henderson, the ranch owner. His handshake was firm and his voice calm. "Morning, ladies. I'm Jim. You'll be working here with my wife Maria and a few ranch hands. We've got a lot to do before the next roundup." The women looked at him with surprise. No insults, no barking orders, just a simple welcome. Maria stepped out from the porch, her brown hair tied back, carrying a tray with tin cups. "You look thirsty," she said, handing out cold water. "We'll get you settled before the heat rises." The prisoners were led to a bunkhouse near the barn. Inside were wooden bunks, blankets, and shelves for clothes. It smelled of soap, hay, and old wood. Greta touched one of the beds and whispered, "It's clean." In a war where everything had turned to rubble, a clean bed felt almost unreal. Later that afternoon, Jim explained the rules. "You'll work 8 hours a day," he said. "No one will carry a gun. You'll be watched but not chased. You'll eat the same food we do. You follow orders, you stay safe. Fair?" The women nodded slowly. It sounded fair. More than fair. It sounded human. He handed out work clothes, old jeans, cotton shirts, and wide-brimmed hats. "You can't do ranch work in those uniforms," he said with a grin. The women looked down at themselves. Their grey German uniforms were stiff reminders of who they had been. Maria spoke softly. "Try these. They'll make you one of us." When Greta pulled on the rough denim, it felt strange, heavy, but also freeing. It was the first time in years she wore something that wasn't marked by war. That evening Maria showed them around. "That's the barn. Horses are fed at sunrise. The corrals for training. And out there," she said, pointing at the horizon, "that's work you'll learn to love, even if it breaks your back." The women laughed nervously. One of them asked, "Do you trust us not to run?" Jim shrugged. "Where would you go? The next town's 30 miles away, and the sheriff knows every stranger in these parts. Besides," he added with a small smile, "you'll find there's nowhere else you'd rather be." Dinner was served under the porch roof. Beans, fresh bread, and strong coffee. It wasn't much, but it was warm and shared. Greta had never eaten at the same table as her captors. Yet here there was no captor. Only people trying to live through the war in their own ways. "You'll earn a little each day," Jim told them. "You can buy small things from the commissary. Postcards, candy, soap. You'll see that hard work pays in any language." That night, the sound of crickets filled the dark. Greta sat by the window, watching the moon rise above the ranch. She thought about her brother fighting on the Eastern Front, about the ruins of her city, and about this strange land that seemed untouched by war. It was hard to hate people who gave you bread and spoke gently. She opened her diary and wrote in small handwriting, "Today I met a man who wore a hat instead of a helmet. His horse listened better than most soldiers I've known." The bunkhouse fell silent as the women drifted to sleep. Outside, the wind rustled through dry grass, and the distant sound of horses echoed like waves on a faraway sea. Greta didn't know it yet, but this ranch would change her more than any battlefield could. Tomorrow, she would touch a saddle for the first time, and with it, she would begin to learn the American way of trust. Not by command, but by balance. The next morning, the women were taken to the fields. The sun was already burning, and the wind carried the smell of hay and sweat. Jim, the ranch owner, pointed toward a group of cattle. "You'll help move them," he said. "Stay close. Don't shout. The animals feel fear." Greta and the others nodded, still unsure. They had never touched a horse before. Back in Germany, most of them worked in hospitals, schools, or offices, not in open fields under a wide blue sky. Maria, a local woman, showed them how to hold the reins and keep balance. At first, the horses moved nervously. Greta's horse refused to walk straight, but Maria's calm voice helped. "Don't fight the animal. Feel it. Let it feel you." Slowly, something changed. The horse's ears moved back, listening. Greta took a breath. For the first time, she felt the strange rhythm of trust between human and animal. By afternoon, they were tired but smiling. The work was hard, yet different from what they expected. No chains, no guards shouting, just the sound of wind, hoofbeats, and cowbells. That night, inside the small bunkhouse, they talked in whispers. "It feels like freedom," one woman said softly. Another replied, "But we are still prisoners." Greta looked at the moon through the window and whispered, "Maybe freedom starts inside." Weeks passed. The women learned quickly. They could ride, herd cattle, fix fences, and even cook meals for the ranch hands. The Americans were surprised. They had never seen prisoners work with such care. Jim, the ranch owner, often watched Greta as she worked. She never complained. She didn't talk much either. But when she smiled, it was honest. One evening after dinner, he walked up to her. "Greta," he said slowly, "when this war ends, what will you do?" She looked down. "I don't know," she said. "Germany is broken. My family may be gone." Jim nodded. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "If you want, I could sponsor you to stay, work here, start over." Greta didn't answer. Her heart beat fast. Stay? In America? Could a prisoner really begin a new life here? That night, the bunkhouse was quiet. Greta told the other women about the offer. Some were shocked. Some were jealous. Some said, "It's impossible." But deep inside, each one wondered, what if we could start again? The next morning, as the sun rose over the Texas fields, Greta made her choice. She walked to the fence line, where Jim was saddling his horse. "I will stay," she said quietly. Jim smiled. "Then you're part of this land now." The wind moved through the grass like a wave, and for the first time, Greta didn't feel like a stranger. She felt home. News spread fast. People in town began to whisper. "Did you hear? Some of the German women want to stay." At the diner, men shook their heads. "They were our enemies," one said. "They don't belong here," another added. But not everyone felt that way. Maria, the woman who had taught them to ride, spoke up. "They've worked hard," she said. "They helped us when we needed hands. They deserve a chance." One Sunday, Greta and a few others went into town with Jim to buy supplies. They felt every eye watching them. Some people turned away. A few smiled polite. One old woman even said, "My son fought in Europe, but I can see you're not what they said you were." Greta nodded silently. She didn't know what to say. She just carried the flour sack in her arms and walked back to the truck. As the truck drove away, Maria looked at her and said softly, "People take time to understand, but truth always shows itself." That night, Greta wrote in her small notebook, "They fear what they don't know, but kindness changes fear, slowly, like sunrise." The next morning, she returned to work, quiet, steady, and determined. She no longer waited for acceptance. She had already found her worth in the wide Texas fields. The summer sun burned hot over Texas. The days were long and full of work. Greta woke up before sunrise and helped on the ranch. She had grown strong and tanned. Her hands, once soft and pale, were now rough from rope and grain. She didn't look like a prisoner anymore. She looked like someone who belonged. But one morning, something unusual happened. A soldier from the camp came riding in with a letter. "For Greta Hoffman," he said. Her heart froze. She hadn't received a letter in months. The envelope was thin. Its corners bent. The writing on the front was shaky. Her mother's handwriting. Greta held it like it was made of glass. She went behind the barn, sat under a mesquite tree, and opened it carefully. Inside was a single page. "My dear Greta, the war is over. The city is quiet now, but it feels empty. Your father did not come home. Your brother Carl is missing. I pray you are alive and safe. Food is little, but we survive. I dream that one day you will see green fields again. Mother." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She pressed the letter to her chest and whispered, "Papa, Carl." The sky above her was a deep blue, clear and endless, so different from the grey skies she remembered back home. For a long time, she just sat there listening to the wind blow through the grass. Later, Maria found her. "Greta, are you all right?" Greta nodded slowly. "My family. The war took so much." Maria sat beside her. "I'm sorry, honey," she said softly. "War always takes the good ones first." They sat in silence. The only sound was the rustling of leaves and a horse snorting nearby. That evening, Greta showed the letter to the other German women. They all grew quiet. Some had lost their families too. One whispered, "At least we're alive. At least we can still write." That night, Greta looked up at the Texas stars. They were bigger and brighter than any she'd ever seen. She thought of her mother, alone in a ruined town. She thought of her father's strong hands, her brother's laughter. She thought of home. And then she thought of Texas. The laughter at the ranch, the smell of hay, the sound of horses, the kindness of strangers who had every reason to hate her but didn't. Maybe, she thought, there was more than one kind of home. The next morning, fields passing by. The wide sky, the windmills, the horses running free in the distance. This was Texas, the land she never expected to love. Hours later, the camp disappeared behind her. She opened her small notebook one last time and wrote, "Texas showed me something the war never did. That strength is not in guns, but in kindness. That enemies can become friends." Now, one afternoon, she took her mother's letter to the small chapel near the ranch. She placed it on the wooden altar and whispered, "I'll come home one day, Mama, but I'll come stronger." By September, rumors spread that the war in Europe had fully ended and that prisoners might soon be sent home. Some women cheered, some cried. Greta felt both hope and fear. What would she return to? A home full of ruins and memories? Or could she stay in this strange land that had once been her prison, but now felt like freedom? When she asked Maria, the older woman said, "You follow where your heart feels peace. That's your real country." That night, Greta walked out into the open fields. The moonlight painted the grass silver. In the distance, she could hear the soft neighing of horses, wild and free. She smiled through her tears. The letter from Germany had broken her heart, but it had also reminded her of something powerful. She had survived. And in that survival, she had found a new kind of strength. "They took my home," she wrote in her notebook, "but they could not take my hope." That hope, quiet, steady, unbroken, would carry her through the rest of her days in Texas and beyond, because in the end, she had learned what no war could teach, that even in the farthest place on earth, Kindness could feel like home. Winter came slowly to Texas. The air grew cooler, the fields turned brown, and the mornings were quiet again. Inside the camp, people began to whisper about one thing: going home. One morning, the American officer gathered all the German. Jim found her feeding the horses earlier than usual. He noticed her red eyes. "Bad news from home?" he asked gently. Greta nodded. "Yes, but I will keep working." Jim smiled faintly. "That's the spirit. My dad used to say, you can't change the wind, but you can adjust your saddle." Greta smiled a little. "Your father was a wise man. He was a cowboy," Jim said. "They learn from the land." As the days passed, Greta poured her sadness into work. She helped mend fences, learned to milk cows, and even started teaching English to some of the new women at the camp. Her voice carried both strength and softness he grew up on. Would anyone still remember her? Maria came into the barracks quietly. She saw Greta sitting on her bed, holding the letter again. "You're leaving soon," Maria said softly. Greta nodded. "Yes, but I don't know if I'm ready." Maria smiled kindly. "No one ever is. But maybe home isn't a place, Greta. Maybe it's the people who cared for you along the way." Greta's eyes filled with tears. She hugged Maria tightly. "Thank you. You've been like a mother to me," she whispered. Maria laughed gently. "Then remember what I taught you. Keep your head high, your heart soft, and your hands busy." The next day, Jim found Greta near the barn, brushing her favorite horse, Rusty. "So," he said, "you're finally heading home." Greta smiled sadly. "Yes, but I'll miss this place. And these horses." Jim nodded. "I'll miss you too. You made this ranch better, Greta." He paused, then reached into his pocket and handed her something small. It was a silver button, old and shiny. "My father gave it to me before I went to war," Jim said. "Said it would bring luck. Maybe it'll bring you some too." Greta looked at it for a long time before saying, "I'll keep it forever." That afternoon, the women began packing. They were given new clothes, food for the journey, and small suitcases. The camp that had once been filled with noise was now full of quiet goodbyes. As the trucks arrived, many of the local Texans came to wave goodbye. Some brought food, pies, bread, and fruit, the same way they had done when the women first arrived. But this time, there was no fear, no anger, only respect. Maria came running up as Greta climbed into the truck. "Don't forget, write to me when you get there," she said, waving her apron. Greta smiled through her tears. "I promise." The trucks rolled away down the long, dusty road. Greta watched the few women. He read from a paper in his hand. "The war in Europe is officially over," he said. "The government has decided to send prisoners back home. The first group leaves in 2 weeks." There was silence. Then voices broke out. Laughter, crying, disbelief. Some hugged each other. Others stood still, unsure whether to be happy or afraid. Greta felt her heart twist. Home. She had dreamed of that word for so long. But now, after everything, it felt different. That night, she couldn't sleep. The stars outside looked like bright eyes watching her from above. She thought about her mother's letter, about her father who never came home, about Carl, her missing brother. Would she even recognize the streets? And that sometimes, the hardest place becomes the one you miss most. She looked up at the setting sun, painting the sky in gold and red. Somewhere far across the ocean was Germany, broken, waiting, uncertain. But here, in the warmth of the Texas light, Greta felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. As the truck drove on, she held the silver button tight in her hand. It shone softly in the fading light, like a small promise. She didn't know what waited for her in Germany, but she knew who she was now. She was not a prisoner. She was not an enemy. She was a survivor. And a part of her heart would always stay under the wide Texas sky, where real cowboys once rode past German prisoners, and somehow taught them freedom.